I had such a good reading month in May. Let's have a chat about the books that I read. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video is the May reading wrap-up, which I 100% forgot to put on my at a glance video. Before we jump into the list of the things that I read, make sure you're checking the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord, should you want to come along for the ride. Now, May was an incredible month for me. There were a few different factors that allowed me to read a little bit more than I normally did, but I did read 10 books in the month of May. For someone with a 6-book average, I'm going to take that as a win. Now, a few different factors, like I said, played a part in this. I did have 3 YA novels that read a little bit faster and were a little bit shorter on this list. I had some books that I was genuinely really excited about, and 3 shorter audiobooks clocking in at about 10 to 15 hours each, which allowed me to get more reads in. We were also house sitting a friend of mine, so it was just Rachel and I for an entire month, rather than worrying about other people in the space that we're now back in and residing. So we'll see how reading goes going forward, but for May, it was a great reading month for me personally. Now, I'm just going to jump right in from the books that I read at the start of May right up until finishing at the end of May, rather than worrying about the ratings. Kicking off the month was The Shattered Ark. This was by M.H. Woodscourt. It's a YA epic fantasy. This one follows a few different POVs, but I would argue the main one is a young princeling who basically needs to grow up. So at the very beginning of the book, we have some people come to his abode to say that a demon has gone loose, and it is roughly connected to an event that happened about 10 months prior, which a very good friend of his passed away in. This book is very much a coming of age / coming of responsibility while he goes on an adventure / quest to try and put this demon back in its place, and also unfolds different elements of the world at the same time. I had a great time with this one. This was my first book from M.H. Woodscourt, who predominantly writes within the young adult sphere. I do have a series of hers that I would like to read as a buddy read at some point, which was more historical fantasy fiction, maybe in the next year or so. So this was the first one that I got to read. I was lucky enough to be on the ARC team for this one, and I had a great time. Next one I picked up was also YA epic fantasy. This was Foreordained by Aaron N. Hall, and this was my review copy for the month. Now, this book was very simple in premise, but quite well executed. We're following a young man, Jason, who lives out of home, and he lives in the poorer side of town. Jason has been foreordained to become the next king, and the current king will stop at nothing to basically have him not take the throne. Jason doesn't know that he wants the throne. He's quite against the idea. He's known for about 3 years at this point, until he comes into his year of decision making. The year of decision making will show him go through a number of different trials set for him by the king to dissuade him from actually taking the throne. He will have help along the way. There's a touch of very clean romance in the book as well. I would caution people who don't like Christian fantasy with this book, because it is very faith heavy. I have spoken to the author about this, and that does lessen over time. But if you're looking for a very easy read, which is quite well executed, and you're looking for something easy on the brain, this one was a really enjoyable, to the point where I have bought the second and third book in the trilogy, because I quite liked it going through. The first audiobook I listened to this month was a book called On the Wind of Quasars by T.A. Bruno. This is book 2 in the Song of Kamaria series. This book has a time jump from the end of In the Orbit of Sirens, and we're dealing with the characters from the first book's children. Very early on in the book, the children get taken by a big bad entity, and we essentially follow what's happening on the site of the kidnapping, and also from the parents trying to go and find them. In my review, which I don't think has come out yet, but I read this one while I was vlogging last month, so I did mention that in the first 60%, it didn't really feel like a whole hell of a lot had happened, and I wasn't sure what the point of the story was. But then we hit that sort of last, I would say 60 to 70% of the book, where T.A. Bruno has pulled in all the foreshadowing that has happened over the first 60% and really made for quite an entertaining and explosive ending. T.A. Bruno can absolutely bring the heat in the endings of these books. I remember the last 30% of In the Orbit of Sirens being super like anxiety inducing. My heart rate was going quite fast, and that was the same with this book here. So I'm very interested in what the final book has to hold in this series. I then read an arc that I was really, really excited to get to, and this is Buzzards Bowl by John Palladino, book 2 in the Tragedy of Sedaine. This book is metal. Like, it's so dark and so snappy and so good. I cannot really talk to you about anything in this book without going into spoilers for the Trials of Ashmount. Just know that this is one phenomenal sequel, and if you like your books sharp-paced, dark, unapologetic as hell, then you're going to have a good time with Buzzards Bowl. I then read probably the most impressive debut that I have ever read since coming onto this platform, that I was lucky enough to get an arc for, and that is Of Thieves and Shadows by B.S.H. Garcia. This book is so ambitious in what it's doing. We've got multi-POV, multi-species, multi-continental fantasy. It is epic in every sense of the word. There are so many elements that have been so carefully crafted and brought together, because this book could have easily have been overcomplicated for a debut, but the author has pulled these elements together in a way which make it flow and get me intrigued even more for more books in the series. The next audiobook I listened to was Age of Assassins by R.J. Barker, book 1 in the Wounded Kingdom trilogy, and I did this one with Esme Roslin, a good friend to BookTube in general and BookTwitter and Bookstagram. Just a book friend that is absolutely lovely. So we did this one together. She had read this book, the first book, already, and we're going to be continuing on the series in the next couple of months, but had a good time with this one. We're following Gerton ap Gwynner, or Gerton Clubfoot, depending on where you are in the story, who is a young assassin under a master. They go to a Castle Maniadoc, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, don't quote me on any of these pronunciations, and they are set to uncover an assassin. So this was very simple in premise, but once again quite well executed. I vibe with R.J. Barker's writing style and characters. There was an element which did throw me a little bit at the beginning, and that was most of the book was written in first person, but then we had these dream sequences which were written in third person, and that took a little while for my brain to put together and come to the conclusions. But R.J. Barker can write an ending. The Child trilogy is still one of my favourite series to date, and after reading the end of this book, where the twists and the turns really just came in those last sort of 3 hours of the audiobook, I trust R.J. Barker to rip my heart out at some point during this series. The next one I picked up was The Awakening Fire by Cassidy Faline. This was another book that was very kindly gifted to me by the author as a review copy for the month, and another YA. This one has 3 men, 1 throne, and the question who will win. Again, simple presence, quite well executed, very dark for a YA book. Check your trigger warnings before going into this one, because we do have some sexual abuse, particularly of young men, by a particular authority figure in this book. So that was quite eye-opening, so do check trigger warnings if you're going to pick this one up. But the 3 young men are all vying for the throne, so we have a young man who is over the current leadership for, reasons. He wants to be the voice of the people, and then gets adopted to be that voice for the people. And we have another 2 young men who believe the throne is theirs to claim, one after having quite a close relationship with the current king and has been told by the king that they want him to now rule upon his demise, and one who believes that his family line is the rightful heir to the throne. It's quite interesting to see the dynamics between these young men and where the loyalties end up shifting throughout the book. Coming up to the end of the month, I finally picked up Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. This is the only real chunker that I had here for the month at 750 odd pages. This was a highly political fantasy, which I adored. This may be one of my top books that I've ever read in terms of what I personally look for in a fantasy story. My favorite part of this book, now it's multi-POV, we've got some complex characters and a complex political situation that goes through the entire book. My favorite thing about this book is that Brooks has complemented the complexities with simplicity. The magic system was very easy to understand, the prose highly accessible, and we also have a whimsical element in the fiends, which are animal companions or characters that also carry magic throughout the world. We have got a lot of elements which really work for me in Peace and Turmoil, and I will have a full review out for this one in the coming weeks. My last audiobook was Record of a Spaceborn Few by Becky Chambers. I don't really know what to tell you about this one. This was probably my least favorite read of the month, and I sat around a 2.5 star for it, directly down the middle. The series so far, this is the Wayfarers series, book 3. The series so far has been highly thematic. It's not plot driven, it's very much character heavy and thematic heavy. The first 2 books were very clear on their thematics, and the first book even had a little bit of a plot and a found family dynamic, which I absolutely loved, and then going through that thematic of acceptance and a lot of LGBTQIA+ rep in the first book. In the second book, we were talking about humanity and what it means to be human, and also exploring some anxiety thematics in there. This one lost me a little bit, because there was the thematic of parenting and growing up and death, and how different people sort of react to death and how death can make us grow as humans, but it felt very wishy-washy throughout the whole book as different elements were sort of thrown in. This one also had a lot more characters to follow than the previous 2, and I couldn't connect to anyone, knowing that these books are more focused on the characters and more focused on the thematic. I wasn't looking for a plot per se. What I will say is the narrator did a phenomenal job. The narrator of the audiobook is very good and quite pleasant to listen to, so it did keep me going through this one. The last thing I read in the month of May was Dreams of Dust by Lily Ann Crow, who, let me tell you, is underrated as hell. This book was so impressive. For a book that has 13 reviews here on Goodreads, I think more people need to be paying attention to Lily Ann Crow. This book, again, a theme for the month of May, was a simple premise that was well executed. But what Lily Ann Crow has done has built upon this simple presence with the world, with the creatures, with the magic, and has made it more and more complex as the story has gone through. Now, I will have a full review for this one as well, but as a general synopsis, we're following Thaniel, who is a cartographer, 17-year-old cartographer, and the magic surrounding the cartography itself was really cool. He has been told by his father he needs to go out from his life of privilege and get a little bit of experience out in the real world. He ends up with a motley crew of both magic users, warriors, and a mum to find some missing people. People have started to go missing from this land, and quite a lot of people are now missing, and no one has been able to track down the why. During this adventure, we start to find out that the Queen of Dust is responsible for the missing people, and the stakes get heightened and it gets more and more dangerous. My favorite element of this book is the Queen of Dust is not explored in full through the entire thing. We only get a glimpse into the motivations behind what she's doing at the very end of the book, and it has me so pumped for book 2 in this series. Those were the 10 books that I read in the month of May. What have you read? What was your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.